All right, Tom Loeffler, 360 Promotions. Are you still affiliated with K2 Promotions? Is K2 Promotions still a thing?
K2 Promotions holds the record for the most heavyweight championship promotions of this century. So I'm still affiliated with them, with Vladimir and Vitaly. Still have a great relationship with them, still in regular contact with them. Now they're in the fight of their life, you know, after having written history in boxing in the heavyweight division. Now they're in the fight of their life for Ukraine. But it's active with K2 Ukraine, which is a sister company run by Alexander Krasyuk, and they're continuing the legacy by the title defenses that Usyk is making right now as heavyweight champion. So to answer your question, I'm affiliated with K2 Promotions. We started K2 in 2003. Our first show was 2004, Lennox Lewis versus Corey Sanders, right across the street here at that time Staples Center, now Crypto.com. So a lot of history with K2 Promotions and a lot of great memories with all the Klitschko fights.
That was the first time that I met you, when I first got into boxing around the early aughts, right around when you got started there. And I remember seeing this American guy up there with Vladimir and Vitaly and Bernd Bonte, you know, as part of that, wondering like, all right, how did this guy get in the mix? How did you wind up as the promoter of record for K2?
The promoter for the Klitschko brothers?
Yeah.
Well, I had started out as a manager in boxing. I had been managing fighters for about 10 years. Started out with Kevin Kelly as the first fighter that we signed. Actually, to go before that, I became partners with my friend Harlan Werner in a sports memorabilia company. He was representing great athletes like Sandy Koufax, Joe Namath, Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, biggest name, Muhammad Ali. So through Ali, we wanted to sign a couple of fighters to manage them, but Harlan was a genius in sports memorabilia, but knew nothing about managing fighters. So I kind of got thrown in. My background is in finance and real estate. I came in kind of as a financial partner to Sports Placement Service, and got thrown into, or took on, the role of managing fighters. So I was managing Kevin Kelly, managing Obakar, the Motor City car from Detroit, Michigan at the time. Fought on USA Network all the time at that time. Trained by, you know, he came out of the Kronk boxing system. So that was my background, was getting in, or how I got into boxing. Managing fighters. We got Kevin Kelly, his first title fight. He was #1 across the board, but couldn't, you know, classic story, couldn't get a title fight. Finally got him on HBO on the undercard of, I think it was Michael Moore at the time, up in Reno, Nevada. I remember it was he was the first featherweight on HBO, I believe, since Salvador Sanchez. So, and he was always in the more exciting fights. He was on the undercard of the co-feature to Michael Moore, to Lennox Lewis, and Kevin always put on the more exciting fights as a featherweight, as opposed to the heavyweight main event. So Lou DiBella, I have to thank him for giving the green light to put Kevin on. And then, you know, with Kevin, Obakar, Shane Mosley, I got Shane Mosley his first title fight. Nobody wanted to fight Shane Mosley out here in California. And so I did a deal with Cedric Kushner. On the advisor's side, we guaranteed Shane a world title fight within 1 year. And we delivered against Philip Holiday. It was on HBO also. First fight at the Mohegan Sun Arena. I believe that was in 96, maybe, when he fought Philip Holiday. And then, you know, he went on to have his storied career. And then I worked with James Toney for about 4 fights after that. Signed Ed Mahone here from the Forum Boxing. He was a heavyweight. And with Ed, did a couple of fights with Layla Ali also, kind of in the middle of all that. That was great when Vladimir fought at the Madison Square Garden. She was the co-feature. That's a whole other story I can get into. But anyway, the Ed Mahone, I brought him over to Germany, to Oberhausen, Germany in 1999 to challenge Vitaly. Vitaly had just knocked out Herbie Hyde for the WBO championship. So to challenge Vitaly, Vladimir was the Olympic gold medalist in 96. I brought Ed Mahone over there to challenge Vitaly. Vitaly winds up knocking Ed out in the 3rd round. I was friends with Bernd Bonte because Bernd was a sports reporter way back then for...
I remember, yeah, he was in the business.
He was in the business for Premiere. So when Kevin Kelly was fighting on HBO, he would come over to cover Lennox Lewis fights. So, you know, him being from Germany, my parents being from Germany, you know, I struck up a friendship with Bern, and then he had told Vitaly at the time, even though we were on opposite side of the ring, so to speak, he said, Tom works with Muhammad Ali, and I said, Vitaly, if you ever want to come to Los Angeles and meet Muhammad at our office, you're welcome. And sure enough, about maybe 4 or 5 months afterwards, his wife was pregnant. They wanted to come over here, have the baby here at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. I invited Vitaly to come to the office to meet Muhammad. We set up that meeting, and then we just developed a friendship after that. You know, we really bonded very well. You know, even though he's from Ukraine and I was born here in Los Angeles, just we had a very similar mentality. And then we had we developed a good friendship over the years. That was in '99, the end of '99. His son was born in 2000. And then, you know, he would just ask me for advice, you know, being in the business for 10 years managing fighters. And then I told Vitaly at one point he was unhappy with his deal with the German promoter, with Universum, and he wanted to get out of it. And when the contract expired, I told Vitaly, why would we sign with another promoter when you and your brother, you know, have this great legacy of heavyweight champions, or, you know, whatever the case was at the time. And I said, let's just start our own promotional company. And that's how we started K2 Promotions. I actually came up with the name K2 because Klitschko ×2, and then there's a high mountain, one of the highest mountains in the world, named K2. So I thought it fit well. And yeah, then we were at the Lennox Lewis fight together in 2003. That's an interesting story. That was also here when Lennox, if you remember that, Lennox was supposed to fight the guy from Canada, if you remember.
I forgot who he Vitaly was the late replacement, right, for that.
Well, what happened was it was supposed to be Lennox Lewis as the main event as the champion, and Mike Tyson was supposed to be the co-feature as the ticket seller. Because Lennox at that time still wasn't, you know, kind of like, you know, selling tickets. So he was a champion, but not, you know, as far
Mike
as
Tyson as the
moving
co-feature.
the needle.
Okay.
So anyway, we pulled up, you know, I figured, and Vitaly was the mandatory at that time to fight Vitaly. I'm sorry, to fight Lennox. So they were in town, and I said, I told them, I said, let's go to the press conference. It was supposed to be Lennox Lewis, supposed to be Mike Tyson. Let's bring the Klitschko brothers, you know, just to get a little bit of media attention as the #1 contender and mandatory for the WBC Heavyweight Championship. That was right here at Staples Center at the time. So we brought him in. Steve Kim runs up when we're parking in the parking lot. He's like, Tyson's off the show. He's not going to fight. You should get Vitaly on the show. I said, well, that's a good idea. So let's you know, go down that road. And Gary Shaw was the promoter at the time, and he's like, there's no way we're going to put Vitaly on. Like, he didn't have any interest, you know, trying to stir up, you know, or promote Vitaly and Lennox. So anyway, we had a good relationship with AEG, who runs Staples Center or Crypto.com now. And they put pressure on Gary because Vitaly was here, big Ukrainian community in Los Angeles, kind of, you know, leads to the story, mandatory challenger as the co-feature to Lennox Lewis. And so it was going to go as Vitaly fighting, I think it was Cedric Boswell he was going to fight, and Lennox was going to fight Kirk Johnson. Kirk Johnson gets injured, and then HBO, literally about 2.5 weeks before the fight, says to Lennox, like, you know, if you want to keep the date, you got to fight Vitaly, you know, to make it interesting. And we actually had a clause with the WBC where Vitaly also was one of those situations where he was a mandatory challenger for a long time, and then we had made an agreement where Lennox could fight that fight, and then the next fight he had to fight Vitaly. So when Kirk Johnson got injured, he really didn't have a choice but to fight Vitaly. The only question was if he still wanted to keep that date or reschedule it sometime down the road and then fight Vitaly that way. So Vitaly, to me, I remember this this story that when I asked Vitaly, do you want to fight Lennox? Because, you know, he was training to defend his title. And Vitaly said, look, Tom, I've been used to growing up, like, you know, they were in military bases in Ukraine, or in the Soviet Union, I should say. Their father was a military pilot in the Soviet Union, so they would go around to different air bases. And he said sometimes it was like going to a new school, a new military base. He's the biggest guy on the base. He got surrounded by like 10 guys sometimes, and like he had to prove himself. And he's like, if there's only one guy in the ring, it doesn't matter. He's like, make the fight. Make the fight with Lennox, it doesn't matter. If I'm only fighting one guy, just make the fight. That shows you the mentality that Vitaly had growing up. He was actually a kickboxing world champion, which you know, speaks to his, you know, combat sports prowess. You know, most kickboxers are a little bit more awkward than to be in going to the boxing, but kickboxing world champion, has that classic fight against Lennox Lewis where he has the big gash. He's winning 4 out of the 6 rounds, winning on the scorecards. Usually in a fight like that, I know it's a terrible cut. You know, you can kind of go back and forth if it should have been stopped or not. But if you're winning the fight, if it's a heavyweight championship of the world, and if the referee isn't stopping it, then, you know, you can make the argument, let it go one more round. But anyway, that was the Lennox Lewis fight, and then we did our first fight. Then Lennox, instead of doing the rematch with Vitaly, he waited a year and then vacated the title, and then Vitaly fought Corey Sanders for the vacant WBC heavyweight championship, and then we went on this long run of promoting Vitaly and Vladimir.
I always wondered how those two would have performed in a different era, because they were kind of victims of fighting in a heavyweight era that wasn't great, right? There wasn't a lot of top tier competition like there was in the 1990s, or even like what there is right now. Like, you know, Vladimir would seek out the biggest challenges. He would seek out title unification fights, but there wasn't a lot interesting out there for them.
Yeah, he had 3 mandatory challengers from Tony Thompson.
I remember Emmanuel Stewart used to beg the IBF, which is still doing that shit, used to beg the IBF to stop making Tony Thompson the mandatory challenger.
Tony would fight an eliminator fight, become a mandatory. Vladimir beat him. A couple years later.
He's the Karen Chukadzian.
It just kind of got recycled. But you know, every one of their fights, it was in a huge soccer stadium over there in Germany.
Yeah, I went to a bunch of them. We were calling those fights for epics in the U.S. I would be traveling over to Europe.
Yeah,
and they would put 60,000 plus into these stadiums. Yeah, it was incredible. No matter who they fought.
They were rock stars.
Yeah,
and it was unusual, just kind of like Triple G becoming a rock star over here from Kazakhstan. You know, them being from Ukraine, becoming rock stars from over in Germany. And I believe you were over with Epics in Switzerland when we did a show over there. That was one of the Tony Thompson fights also. But yeah, it was a great run with both the brothers. And then, you know, with K2, then we signed Triple G in 2011, did the first fight on HBO 2012.
So let's get into that, Triple G. Because most people in the U.S. know you as the guy that brought Gennady over stateside, helped mold him into the star that he became. Yeah. How did you discover Gennady Golovkin?
You know, we had a mutual friend. I had a mutual friend with a close friend of Gennady's. He was living in Stuttgart at the time. You know, with me having the success of the Klitschkos over there in Germany, he's like, well, let's approach Tom. See, he was also coincidentally with Universum, and he was unhappy with his promotional contract as well. And so they went through the legal steps of trying to get out of that contract. And since we went down that road with the Klitschkos, they said, you know, let's approach Tom and see if we can do something. That was also a historic event where he was going to be the co-feature as the WBA interim champion. He was going to be the co-feature to Vladimir in Dusseldorf. Vladimir was going to fight in a 50,000-seat soccer stadium. Gennady, who was pretty much unknown at the time, or not well known, I should say, was going to be the co-feature in a title defense to Vladimir. Vladimir gets injured, if you remember, not injured, but he had a kidney stone on that Sunday. He had to get operated on Monday, or he got operated on Sunday. And Monday we held the press conference saying he can't fight, but Gennady's still going to fight. And we went from a 50,000-seat soccer stadium to literally a 500 capacity ballroom in the host hotel, like downstairs in one of their ballrooms, which was the first time we ever did a fight together. That was before he signed Triple G, but we were in discussions with him. And yeah, going from a huge soccer stadium to a 500-seat arena, wound up knocking out Luan Simon in the first round, which kind of shows Gennady's prowess, where Luan Simon had never been stopped before. He had fought guys like Arthur Abraham. He fought like Pirog, never been stopped before. Gennady knocks him out with a perfect, I think it was a left hook in the first round. And that kind of like showed, you know, where his trajectory, where he was going to go. But that's how I got in contact with Triple G. I'd known Abel Sanchez from the Obakar days. He had helped with Obakar a little bit up in Big Bear. That's when Emmanuel Stewart was up in Big Bear. Abel didn't have his training center up there yet, but he had lived in Big Bear, and so he was always kind of helping Emmanuel out in those days. And a lot of people don't realize it. They thought I brought Gennady over from Germany, but it was actually, he was already training with Abel, with my relationship with Abel, and then with the mutual friend from Germany that introduced us. Then we wound up signing Triple G to a promotional contract. Started Triple G Promotions at the time. And, you know, I was literally begging. I remember that we had meetings in January of 2012 with Showtime, with Epix, and with HBO.
So what are those conversations like? Because you've got this undefeated Eastern European power puncher that doesn't speak a lot of English. Like, how receptive were those networks initially?
I'll tell you exactly how they went. My pitch was, here's this guy, undefeated. He was also Olympic silver medalist, which he was probably known most for, and he was an amateur world champion. But I said, and you know, Abel Sanchez was there, Triple G was there, I was there, the Herman brothers, the managers were there, and it was a very easy pitch. I said, he'll fight anyone in his division, whether it was Pirog or any of those guys at the time. Sergio Martinez was in that division, Daniel Gill was in the division. I mean, those were the stars at the time of that division. He'll fight any of those guys. He doesn't need a lot of money. It really didn't need any money at the time. Yeah, I mean, that was he just wanted to have a platform in the U.S. on U.S. TV. Met with Showtime, Epix, and HBO. Epix was interested. A lot of people didn't even know where Kazakhstan was at the time. It wasn't fashionable, you know, other than the Klitschko brothers and being from Ukraine. It wasn't really fashionable to bring over Eastern European or former Soviet country fighter. I mean, Triple G also still came up in that Soviet amateur boxing system when he was fighting for Kazakhstan. And that was it. And then so it looked like Stephen Espinoza at Showtime. It looked like, so that meeting was in January. It looked like we might get a date in April to fight on Showtime. And then somehow that didn't work. Then it was going to be, we had kind of had the same situation with Triple G in the WBA. He was the mandatory for the longest time to Felix Sturm. That was another fight that he would have taken with Felix Sturm. And Sturm was going to fight Pirog. No, I'm sorry, scratch that. Gill was going to fight Pirog on HBO. And then there was going to be another, there was a Gary Shaw show, Gary Shaw and Artie Palulu show. Gill gets a bigger offer from Sturm to go to Germany because the WBA had ruled he's got to fight Triple G next unless there was a title unification. So he paid more than HBO for Gill to come to Germany for a title unification. Gill had the IBF title at the time. Gill actually wound up beating Sturm, but Felix wanted nothing to do with fighting Triple G as his mandatory. And then that left Pirog without an opponent. And they called me up, and then I said, sure, you know, Triple G will fight Pirog, who was also a killer. He knocked out Danny Jacobs, if you remember, in the second round. Big puncher. Unfortunately, Pirog, that would have kind of like cemented Triple G's legacy as the very first fight on HBO, title unification with another champion. That was actually haunted us because that WBO title was was the only title Triple G couldn't unify, because then it went to Billy Joe Saunders, and he wanted nothing to do with Triple G at the time. So anyway, to make a long story short, we got the date in September on HBO, and Pirog had injured his back. So Artie Palulu was trying to do everything he could to get out of putting Triple G on. But thanks to Peter Nelson, he said, look, we promised Triple G the fight, the slot. You can pick anyone you want. You know, he'll defend it against whatever. So he picked the complete opposite style. Pirog is a big right-handed puncher. Artie picked the European champion, Proxa, southpaw, slick boxer, with 2 weeks to go. So Abel had to change the whole sparring routine, but Triple G didn't care. He was another one of those guys that said, just, you know, it doesn't matter who I fight, just put him in the ring. And he dismantled Proxa, like I think it was in the 5th round stoppage.
I remember I was there for that, upstate New York, right? Yeah.
That's right. That was up in, that was in the
Hall of Fame territory, yeah.
The Hall of Fame casino up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Turning
Stone, I believe.
Turning Stone, right. Yeah. You mentioned all the guys that didn't want to fight him. Like, it must have been, and I think one of the things that helped Triple G become a star in those early days was that he didn't price himself out of anything. Like, he obviously wants to make money, and he was probably making some good money in some of these defenses as he progressed. But his activity made, like, he's not only active, but he's going out there and putting on these spectacular shows on the biggest boxing platform that was out there. I mean, was that a tough sell to him, saying, look, you can't get paid a ton, but you can get on HBO, you can do 1 million eyeballs, and that's eventually going to pay off at the end?
He understood it. When I was explaining to Abel and you know, we sat down with him, he totally understood it, because he understood in order to be big in America, you need to fight often. You need to fight on HBO. We took him to New York, to Madison Square Garden. That was another deal. So he had the fight with Proxa. As soon as he had the fight with Proxa on HBO, all the fans, all the boxing fans, like, we want to see Triple G again. So then, you know, I had a good relationship with the MSG, with the Garden from the Klitschko days. And I knew from the success of the Klitschko's fighting there at the Garden that Triple G would translate well over there. There was also a big Kazakh population over there in New York. But I remember doing the first media lunch, and I have to credit you with you were there at Turning Stone, but you were actually the first like sit-down interview with Triple G. I remember we went down in the basement and we had the interview down there, and that was really like his first big interview. Was with Sports Illustrated, right? At the time, and then we wanted to fight at the Garden, and I had a date at MSG, and I told HBO, I said, okay, he wants to fight at the Garden. You know, we didn't have a contract with HBO yet. Epix was very interested in showing the Triple G fight, so I said, okay, if we can't get an HBO date, we're just going to fight at the Garden on Epix. And then Kerry Davis was in charge at the time there, and it was like one of those mishmashes. Well, we can't give him his own date, but Top Rank has a date in Puerto Rico. So if we can put them together on the Top Rank date, I can get Top Rank to come to MSG. So we agreed to that. Top Rank, in their wisdom, insisted on having Mikey Garcia as the main event, where Triple G was having all this momentum now, you know, after that Proxa knockout. So we brought a lot of fans in to see Triple G, and I remember he fought Gabe Rosado. Fought Gabe Rosado at MSG. Nobody wanted.
Sick, I believe. I think he was sick that week.
He had the flu. Yeah, actually, he did have the flu. But it was it's an interesting story how that came about, because he was going to pull out of the fight, and I'm like, I was telling Abel and him, I was like, look, you know, this is our second fight on HBO. It's really important that you go through with it. I said, just go through the weigh-in. It was Thursday night. The fight was on a Saturday. Thursday night, he was feeling really sick. I said, just go through the weigh-in, and if you really can't fight after the weigh-in, you know, we can always cancel that at that time. If you don't weigh in, then the fight's off automatically. Right. So we went through that, and they were filming. What was it? What was the special on HBO? Like 3 days. It was a 3-day special, like 3 days before the fight. And so we gave them all kinds of access. And then after the weigh-in, is like they had no access, because his room was full of like tea and lemon and honey and all kinds of medications. And so it was still kind of like iffy if he was going to fight or not after the weigh-in. He was getting some sleep, and then like that morning he woke up. He slept in. He woke up like around 11 o'clock. And he said he had a dream. He called Abel to the room. He had said he had a dream, like he was talking to a doctor, and the doctor said, you can fight. And he woke up, he's like, okay, I'm going to fight. So then he fought, but he was sick, probably unfortunately for Gabe, because if he would have gone maybe 2 or 3 rounds, you know, no disrespect to Gabe, he was one of the only guys that wanted to fight Triple G at the time, because we didn't have a big budget. Didn't have a big budget.
From junior middle for that fight. He was #1 contender.
#1 contender as the welterweight. But we had a bigger budget than what he was probably going to get paid as the #1 contender, and he never really had a set date of when he would actually get that title. So he knew he would get a world title shot against Triple G at Madison Square Garden. I was dealing with Russell Peltz at the time, and we made that fight. Again, credit to Gabe for his heart, because he hung in there, and Gennady, you know, I think it was 8 rounds, and his trainer Billy Briscoe, I believe, or Benny Briscoe.
Billy Briscoe, he was one saying, we got to stop it. Talking to his father, he was
telling the father, if I don't stop it, your son's going to die.
That was great TV. That was great TV.
So that was very dramatic to go with the big drama show. So now that was his second fight on HBO. Then we went to Curtis Stevens. No, then we went to Monaco. We did a deal with the South African promoter, actually the same promoter who had Philip Holiday. We did a deal with him where he needed a world title fight for Monaco. So Monaco is this magical place that we said, okay, let's go fight over there and to stay active. Again, it wasn't a big payday, but he wanted to make title defenses. He wanted to keep putting the pressure on Felix Sturm, who WBA elevated to super champion to avoid
in their infinite wisdom,
the mandatory of Triple G. And Rodney Berman is the promoter that did the shows over there. So we went over there, and HBO, in their infinite wisdom, somehow decided not to show that Triple G fight from Monaco. So I forgot, I don't know, it might have even been dark over here in the States. There was a big uproar about that. But then we came back here on HBO against Curtis Stevens, and a lot of people, I remember a lot of East Coast people were saying, oh, Curtis Stevens is going to expose him. You know, he's a big puncher himself. He's a local guy from New York. He brought a lot of fans. And Triple G really got motivated for that fight because there was like a lot of bad blood in the buildup. He's a very calm, collected, you know, sportsman-like guy. But Curtis went kind of crossed the line, and it really pissed off Gennadi's brother, Max Golovkin. They're twin brothers, and he did a video of him burying a casket and it said Triple G, and that's like to them and their mentality in Kazakhstan is like you don't play around with that, especially with boxing. You don't intimate that someone's going to die.
And they've also got a history with their family, with their brothers passing in the past. Like they've got certainly a history.
2 brothers that passed, yeah, that's right.
So I'm sure that hits home, close to home. But that was a great performance by Gennady. That I need a bunch of them after that. And the first big event, though, that I think we were talking about before Canelo even was Andre Ward. And Andre Ward has made a lot of statements in the past about how he wanted that fight, and Gennady and you didn't want the fight for various reasons. So give me your version of events of how the Golovkin-Ward negotiations went, because that was a fight that we never got to see.
There was no negotiations. Andre somehow convinced or bamboozled or whatever with his fans that he sent an offer over. We got an email. So this is how it went. Triple G wanted to unify all the titles. He knew if he was going to prove that he's the best middleweight in the world, he had to fight other champions. So the first champion we were able to convince to get in the ring with him was David Lemieux, IBF champion. The reason why David Lemieux agreed is because he had a mandatory. The Golden Boy wasn't sure if he would beat his mandatory, so I figured let's do the unification fight. We'll get bigger money fighting Triple G. It was at Madison Square Garden. It was Triple G's first pay-per-view fight, first unification fight, first fight at the big arena. Actually, the second fight. He fought Daniel Geale at the big arena, but the first time. This was the second fight. So we announced that fight. I remember about 5 hours after we announced it, I get an email from Dave Itzkowitz from Rock Nation. Would you be interested in fighting Andre Ward? I can tell you the exact 50-50 fight, 50-50 split at 168 pounds. I'm like, Dave, we just announced the unification fight against David Lemieux. So when Andre said it took 15 minutes for me to turn down the offer, it's like, well, he really had a fight announced. So I don't know why Andre went so public with that. I think there was really, look, as an Olympic gold medalist from America, and Triple G was selling more tickets and bringing more fans and bringing more pay-per-views and HBO ratings, whatever it was, I think there was a lot of disgruntlement, I guess is the only way I can say it, why he went so public with it, because we had that fight, and then in the email, I said, if he wins the Lemieux fight and he's unified WBA IBF champion, then he wants to go after the WBC title, WBO title. That's all I said, and there would be really no reason. Ward never really brought a lot of money to the table. Like when he fought Arthur Abraham here at the StubHub Center down here. It was like a half-full arena. Triple G, his very first fight there against Marcos Rubio, we sold 9,000 tickets in a 7,000-seat arena. So when I said he would go to 168, it had to be a big fight. Chavez Jr. would have been a huge fight. Top Rank offered Chavez Jr. guarantee, I remember the numbers, $7 million guaranteed to fight Triple G. And if he lost, they would pay him another $5 million. So Chavez Jr. would have gotten $12 million to fight Triple G, and Triple G would have gotten like $3 million. But it would have been a huge name. I remember what was the guy over in England, the 168 pounder? Well, I don't know why. Forget Carl Froch.
Yeah.
Carl Froch sold out Wembley Stadium against the other guy, Groves, 80,000 people. Said, okay, now if Triple G goes to the UK and fights Carl Froch, that's a huge fight. That he would go to 168 for that, but his priority would be to stay at 160 pounds. So that was the whole thing. I don't know why there was so much bad blood there with Andre, and it'd be like Triple G saying to Floyd Mayweather, who fought at like 154 one time, well, we're going to make Mayweather an offer, and if he doesn't come to 160, then we're going to disparage Mayweather. That was never the case. I had made a lot of offers that got turned down. I never went public with them because it's like, okay, you don't want to fight him? That's fine. Let's go a different direction. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, Sergio Martinez, Felix Sturm, all those big names, Chavez Jr., Froch, whatever it was, we never got them in the ring. But to Mark Taffert's credit at HBO, he said, look, Triple G is moving the needles. He's selling out arenas. He's getting high ratings. I remember the Curtis Stevens fight got a huge rating on HBO. It was regular HBO. It wasn't pay-per-view at the time. And so it's like, if these guys, and I showed internally, I showed the negotiations. This guy turned the fight down. This guy turned the fight down. This guy turned the fight down. Peter Nelson was going to say, let's make a T-shirt. It's like, I'll fight Triple G, just not next. That was the line. It's like, yeah, we'll fight him, but not in the next fight. Let's wait. And so,
did the Ward stuff ever get revisited after all the initial decline, or
no,
however
because
it worked out?
Because then, okay, so then it was it was Lemieux, and then he was chasing he wanted to fight Sergio Martinez. Sergio Martinez got beat by Miguel Cotto.
Yeah.
He was the mandatory in the Marco Rubio fight. He became the mandatory for the WBC. He was the interim champion. Became the mandatory. So we agreed, instead of chasing Sergio Martinez, which we wanted to chase him, we said, okay, let him make the deal with Cotto. Cotto wins the title. Cotto's now WBC champion. Triple G's is mandatory. Cotto was represented, I forgot who it was, but I said, they're like, Cotto wanted to fight Canelo then, which was a huge fight. Puerto Rico versus Mexico, two big names. I didn't want to stand in the way of that. I said, okay, you can fight him, but just give us, you know, just vacate the title, because it was mandated by the WBC that he fight him next. They didn't want to give up the title. They actually paid us a huge step-aside fee, which we got criticized for. We didn't want the step-aside fee. I was telling Mauricio, so we don't want the step-aside fee. You can keep offering more and more, the Cotto side, you can keep offering more. He just wants the title. He wanted to be the undisputed middleweight champion. So then we agreed. They paid a lot of money to Triple G to let the Cotto-Canelo fight continue, because Mauricio said, you know, just let this fight happen. And then we actually had it signed. So then Canelo beats Cotto. Now Canelo was never really on our radar screen. He was a 154-pounder. He goes up to fight for the middleweight title. Now he's right there. Triple G's the mandatory for Canelo. We allow Canelo, without any step-aside fee, to fight Amir Khan. And the agreement was, you get one title defense, and then you have to fight Triple G. It was signed by Golden Boy. It was signed by us. It was signed by the WBC. Mauricio was there. Our attorney was there. Everyone agreed. He knocks out Amir Khan. Now it's time to fight Canelo. So the Andre Ward situation was way in the back burner there, because Canelo was a much bigger fight. And so we go down that road, and then Canelo somehow decided he wasn't a 160-pounder. He goes back down to 154 to fight Liam Smith, vacates the 160-pound title. Now Triple G collects that title. So now he's got the IBF title, WBA title, WBC title. Now he wants to unify with the WBO title. So that's how the whole Canelo thing came up, because Canelo got a lot of grief from his Mexican fans, and Triple G had a lot of Mexican fans. And when Canelo vacated the title, it's like, a Mexican champion does not vacate a WBC title. I think it was the first time in history that a champion from Mexico vacated the WBC title, and that caused him a lot of grief. So then there was a lot of bad blood then from the Canelo and Triple G side. We did that fight in 2017. We broke 1 million pay-per-view buys. We had the third highest record in Nevada boxing history. I think it was $27 million gate. So, you know, Andre Ward at that point wasn't even a discussion, because then The other point that I have to remind people on is he had a lot of legal issues with his promoter, with Dan Goosen. He had a lot of injury issues. The only time that fight really could have happened was when Triple G, when people weren't trying to fight Triple G. Andre was going to fight here out in Ontario, and I had heard they offered Edwin Rodriguez $1 million. That was more than Triple G was getting at the time. $1 million for the Edwin Rodriguez fight. I said Triple G would fight him for $1 million at 168 at that time, and he had just come off the shoulder surgery, so they didn't want the Triple G fight at that time. So, you know, for Andre to say, like, we turned down an offer, I think there's a lot of behind the scenes that the fans don't know about. That was the closest that we could have gotten to making a fight with Ward at 168. But then after that, once Triple G had the Canelo fights, and then he had that mandatory, you know, then it just, then we had the Canelo rematch, and then we had the trilogy, and like all the fights after that were bigger than the fight. Then he went, remember, he went to Japan and fought Murata over there. That was a big fight in Tokyo. Sold out the Saitama Arena. So he was making history, sold out the O2 Arena against Kell Brook. I mean, all these things that he wanted to accomplish as a middleweight champion while still chasing Billy Joe Sanders for that WBO title, which he was never able to get.
Do you think he left anything on the table? I mean, not if I was going to offer one criticism of Gennady at the end, was that he was inactive. Like he didn't. And look, a lot of fighters, when they get older, operate that way. You look for the biggest purses, and you don't want to stay busy types of fights. But there were some appealing fights out there for Gennady over the last 3 or 4 years, but he just didn't take. Instead, taking like a Camille Zarameta fight, or look, Murata is a big fight, a unification fight over there. But as far as a U.S. audience goes, not much of one for it. Like, what did you make of the last few years of Gennady's career?
Well, he went from being one of the most active champions, and that's how we built him. We built him with the Mexican fan base, brought him down to Mexico City, had a great relationship down there. He went to a children's cancer ward down there. He was like a great ambassador for the sport of boxing. Wherever we took him, he was literally like the people's champion. Wherever we took him, he was received really well, whether it was in England. He had a ton of fans over there in London. He had a ton of fans in Poland. After he beat Proxa, he had like 3 Polish opponents, and he was like 4 years in a row, he was voted fighter of the year, boxer of the year in Poland for the Polish fans. So a great ambassador and, you know, clean-cut guy, well-spoken, spoke Kazakh, Russian, German, English, you know, and English was probably pretty far down on his list. So
Which kind of endeared him to U.S. fans.
It did,
Big drama show stuff. And
his quotes to Max Kellerman in the ring and the interviews afterwards, you know, like you said, big drama show, a good boy. He called Curtis Stevens a good boy. Or maybe it was even Rosado back in the Rosado days.
That's T-shirt stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like big
all
drama
that
show.
stuff. They were selling T-shirts at the Rubio fight here at StubHub. Mexicans for Golovkin. You've never seen that before. So, you know, that's so. To get back to your question, as far as his inactivity as it got later in his career, I mean, it's one of those things as you're making. Then he started really making, you know, the money with the Canelo fights, the pay-per-view fights. He had a pay-per-view fight against Danny Jacobs in a sold-out Madison Square Garden. The 3 Canelo fights, you know, then, you know, it's not like you have the same drive.
It's tough to go back down to when you're making $25 million or more to fight Canelo, to go back down to like $2 million to fight some of these guys. I get it. It's just sort of like we spent so many years clamoring for Gennady to be in bigger fights than like Willie Monroe or some of these other guys he was fighting. Like when they were right there, it's like, oh, can we just get it? Like I get it. It doesn't change the fact that it disappoints a little bit.
There was some change in the team chemistry, unfortunately. You know, I always thought if you have a winning formula, just go with the winning formula. Abel Sanchez, who was like a father figure to Triple G, we all went and flew to Kazakhstan when his father passed away from a sudden heart attack. That was a very emotional trip, but it was like a real close-knit family. When Abel was out, I thought he would be out before. I mean, I thought he would be the longest one to stay. First, they had an issue with the Klitschko. With the Herman brothers. So the Herman brothers were out as the managers, and then it was Abel and myself, and then there was a financial issue with Abel, where Abel, you know, kind of took the position of, I made 10% when there was zero. literally there was
This
zero.
was after Gennady signed that DAZN contract.
There was literally zero on the table, a number of fights where he didn't make anything, and he was only fighting because of his sponsorship from Kazakhstan. So Abel's argument was, well, at that time I wasn't making anything, but now when the money is a lot bigger, that was after the DAZN thing, and I was actually an advocate for him going to the ESPN deal. ESPN had a much bigger platform, and I always said, you know, if DAZN was offering significantly more money, then you have to go with the money. You could go with DAZN. It was nothing against DAZN, but it was just the fact that DAZN was starting up at the time, and ESPN had the established platform. ESPN matched the DAZN offer, so I said, you got to go with ESPN. Then internally, with his advisors that he had at the time, they decided to go with the DAZN deal, and so that I was still involved, but not to the same degree. If I had still been involved, maybe it would have been differently. When I was kind of making the decisions, you know, who we'd fight, when he'd fight, that type of thing, I probably wouldn't have picked Steve Rolls as the first fight on DAZN. That didn't do much for the credibility, because my argument the whole time, like social media, I was always arguing, well, he's fighting the best guys that are available. Remember, he had a mandatory, he had some IBF mandatories that weren't that weren't great. I remember Dominic Wade fighting here at the Forum in Los Angeles, and no one really knew who Dominic Wade was, but we sold out the Forum, and he was at the time such a rock star that people didn't even care if it was an early knockout. You know, knocked out Rubio in the second round. I think Dominic Wade was an early knockout also, but people didn't say, I want my money back. It was like a Tyson fight. Nobody complained when there was a first or second or third round knockout for a Tyson fight. It was like the place to be up in Las Vegas, and that's the level Triple G was at. Then when he started, you know, with the DAZN deal, then it was like a little bit different. Like you said, Zarameta, Steve Rolls, you know, maybe he could have fought some different guys at the time, slowed down on the activity. I don't know, because I wasn't in direct discussions with DAZN at the time as far as like how many dates he was going to get. So, you know, I don't know about the criticism of him slowing down, because, you know, any fighter that gets older makes more money. Look, Floyd would fight, you know, like clockwork, twice a year or maybe once a year on the Mexican holidays, and you know, that's kind of where it went with the Triple G situation.
So one things I like about you as a promoter is, like, look, you've got a stable, right? You do a lot of these club shows in Southern California, which are terrific, and I know they're challenging to do, to say the least. But you put them on. I always say you put the best ones on the West Coast, and DeBella puts great ones on the East Coast. You've kind of mastered that, but you kind of sink your teeth into one fighter. For a lot of years, it was Gennady. Right now, it's Callum Walsh. That is your guy, and you're sitting here talking to me with your Irish boxing.
Got my Irish boxing shirt on.
You got your Irish boxing shirt on. Just weeks earlier, Callum was over in Ireland, did a great crowd at 3 Arena over there, fast becoming a draw. Tell me about your journey with Callum, and kind of how good do you think he is?
Well, after HBO got out of the business of boxing, it was a long time. You know, the pandemic hit. Didn't have TV. I started 360 Promotions. Started Triple G Promotions with Triple G. That was to do all of his fights. He had signed, you know, some Kazakh fighters also that we put on the Triple G show. But I started 360 Promotions to kind of develop fighters to a level where they could fight on a Triple G show or on a bigger show. So then when Gennady, you know, slowed down, didn't have the same amount of activity, you know, just put more time and effort into 360 Promotions. We signed Callum Walsh. We were doing, literally at that time, we were doing the club shows in a Hollywood nightclub. That's how I came up with the name, Hollywood Fight Nights. And met with Dana White after we signed Callum. He had his pro debut. Met with Dana. I had known Dana because he famously, well, not famously, but he had said the only reason he watches boxing is to watch Triple G at the time. That was like the only compelling TV for boxing. So set up a meeting with Dana, brought Callum Walsh up there. Right away, I could tell. So Callum was a European gold medalist, 6-time amateur Irish national champion, trained with Freddie Roach. Dana has a long-standing friendship with Freddie Roach from the Boston days. So when he met Callum's a charismatic guy, big southpaw that can punch. He didn't know too much about the boxing, but when I told him I said, look, I've worked with these guys here, with the Klitschko brothers, Triple G, he knew. Freddie Roach said the same thing. I said, look, this guy is young, but he's very talented. That's how I signed Triple G. Another reason I signed Triple G, because Abel Sanchez, who I'd known from a long time, who had no reason to kind of bamboozle me, said Triple G was the hardest punching fighter that he ever held on the mitts. Regardless of heavyweights, light heavyweights, whatever it was the hardest punching fighter. Freddie Roach said Callum Walsh was one of the most talented young fighters that he'd ever seen. When Freddie says that, when Abel says that, it's like, okay, we got to get involved with this guy. So met with Dana. Dana gave me 4 dates on UFC Fight Pass. We put Callum on all those dates. We got the highest ratings that boxing ever got on Fight Pass. They do over 200 combat sports events per year. Boxing was always kind of like on the lower level or lowest level because it's really more MMA fans, jiu-jitsu fans, grappling, whatever it is for UFC Fight Pass. And I told Dana, look, if we promote it the right way, we promote it like an HBO show just on UFC Fight Pass, and you develop a star, then people are going to watch boxing on Fight Pass. So he gave us the 4 dates, got the highest ratings I've ever gotten. The next year, we got 8 dates. This year, we got 10 dates. One of the dates was to Dublin. I give Dana a lot of credit for that. He had the foresight. Callum's 23 years old, 11-0, 9 knockouts. He's like, let's go to Ireland, because the press Callum was getting over there in Ireland was very big. And Dana, with the whole McGregor experience in Ireland, loves the Irish fans, said, it's time to take Callum. I thought it was 1 year too early, but Dana said, let's take him over there. We did the deal with the 3 Arena. Dana did the entire production on the UFC side. It was like a full UFC fight night production. Great production. They did deals with, his press conference, like TNT Sports picked it up, ESPN in Latin America picked it up. It was a worldwide thing, in addition to being non-exclusive on Fight Pass. So we had 5,000 people in the 3 Arena, the same arena that Katie Taylor fought at. Loudest 5,000 people I've ever heard in my life. I mean, the Irish fans, when he walked in, it was amazing. Right then, I'm like, yeah, Dana hit it on the head. That the reaction that he got. So
he's got the fan base. It's almost the reverse Triple G in a way. Like Triple G had the talent, and then he had to build the fan base. Like Callum seemingly has a fan base at a young age. Does he have the talent?
So, like Triple G, whenever we put Triple G in a high profile, like the first time he fought on HBO, rose to the occasion, beat Proxa. First time he fought at Madison Square Garden, beat Rosado. Every time there was like the first time he fought in the arena, remember he had that highlight knockout with Daniel Geale. Whenever the lights got brighter, some fighters are great in the gym, and when you get on the bright lights, somehow they freeze. Triple G always seemed to shine when the lights shone brightest, and the same thing with Callum Walsh. I would say that was his best performance. 5,000 in it. And there's a lot of pressure when you're carrying the promotion, and you're the hometown fighter that's carrying the promotion. You're the one doing all the interviews. The opponent's not doing interviews. I mean, look at Anthony Joshua in Madison Square Garden. He was carrying the whole promotion, going to New York City, fighting in Madison Square Garden, and then you get upset by Andy Ruiz. I've seen that a lot of times where the hometown fighter has too much pressure on him and doesn't have a great performance. Callum did a great job promoting the fight and did a great job in the ring. And second round knockout over a guy that 22-2 from Poland, Ranowski, never been stopped before. Callum stopped in the second round, and I think that really is a big statement. He's still only 23 years old, 12-0 with 10 knockouts now, and I think he's well on his way. We got other fighters that we've signed. So, like you said, Chris, it's always been kind of like my specialty of focusing on, with the Klitschko brothers, just making sure that everything was run correctly with them. Triple G was like 24/7. Triple G, it was like I was eating, breathing, and sleeping Triple G. Because it was so hard, I had to deal with every promoter, had to deal with every arena, dealing with HBO, whether it's internationally or over here, the ratings, the whole thing. Then when he was a champion, the mandatories, you're like trying to navigate everything. And we really created a guy from Kazakhstan, really created a global star. And that's really the road we're going down with Callum Walsh, because he's already fought at the Garden twice, in the theater at the Garden. He's fought in Boston at the Agganis Arena in Boston. He just fought in Dublin. He's fought multiple times here in Los Angeles, trains out of Wildcard Boxing with Hall of Fame trainer Freddie Roach. So I really think he's on the way. But, it's always hard to predict. There's a big gap between being 12-0 and becoming a world champion at 154 pounds. But, Callum is definitely well on his way. He's got the fan base. He's got Dana White behind him, who's supporting him on the TV side. So I really think he's got all the essentials. He just needs to keep showing it in the ring, and he can really become, by the time he's 25, 26 years old, become the next generation of world champion and Irish superstar.
I'll wrap it up with this. You are the promoter of choice for Dana White, who's made no secret that he intends to get into boxing in some way, shape, or form. Dana now part of that TKO conglomerate, which includes Nick Khan, who is one of the smartest boxing people out there. Now I believe the CEO, or I don't know what his official title is now with that, but high ranking over there. What can you tell people about plans there? What Dana wants to do and what's realistic for Dana to do? Because even though Dana says, I've never been this serious before, he has. He has talked about boxing. I went to the UFC offices once and he had a whole wing of offices for boxing executives. So he's been serious about it in the past. What's different this time, and what do you think is going to come of it?
Well, Dana told me, again, I had to prove myself. I had to prove to get that we can put quality shows on UFC Fight Pass, we get the ratings, promote it correctly. Never had, all the commissions, New York, California, Nevada, they all spoke very highly of me. Mark Ratner, I had a great relationship with Mark Ratner when he was the executive director of the Nevada Commission. He works with the UFC now, a large part why UFC got approved in all the states. And Dana told me, he's like, I've been approached to get into boxing by many people. Is like, I didn't trust any of them. He's like, you're the only one I trust. I proved, as far as he loves the other promise we made to Dana is like, the reason why the UFC model has become so successful is all the matches are competitive. You go in from the early fights and the arenas are full in the UFC fights. You go to a boxing fight in Vegas, you go to these big pay-per-view fights, and they're half empty before the main event. And then all of a sudden, it's full for the main event. It's because there's so many mismatches on undercards in boxing. And
it's also a very different financial model that I don't know that you can just shift over to boxing. Dana's financial model in UFC is so much different than boxing, right?
But if you use that formula that's made him so successful on the UFC side, and like you mentioned, Nick Khan, I know Nick Khan for a long time when he was involved with Manny Pacquiao, going also back to Wild Card and Freddie Roach. So Nick's a great guy. Dana, the first time he's publicly said was over there in Dublin at the press conference where he's like, I've always teased kind of going into boxing. He's like, now I'm in. So now he's made the decision, under TKO, the whole TKO umbrella. Now he wants to go into boxing.
So what does that look like?
I don't want to speak for Dana, but it looks like he's going to be a lot more serious in the boxing. I think he wanted to do this Dublin show to show the level of TV production that a UFC production can be, focusing on a boxing event. So I'm sure he'll, make more announcements and things of that nature. But we still have our deal with UFC Fight Pass. I would say we're the most consistent promoter. We're doing 4 shows now at Commerce Casino, 4 shows at Chumash. So we've really taken over the Southern California on televised, on both activity, 8 shows here in Southern California, and televised, worldwide televised fights. So we're doing a fight October 26th coming up where Omar Trinidad from Boyle Heights is fighting Edgar Sosa from Argentina for the number 2 position in the IBF. Trinidad's defending his Continental Americas title. I mean, those are the level of fights that we're doing. So they're not club shows anymore. They're high level, world class level fights. Sergey Bohachuk came up on UFC Fight Pass. He beat Brian Mendoza. Arguably, he beat Virgil Ortiz in the last fight. But there'll be a big announcement for Bohachuk coming up pretty soon. And we've signed. This is the most fighters I've ever signed to a promotional entity, is under 360 Promotions. And because of the activity, we'll have 12 shows next month. Next year, sorry. We need the fighters to fill all these shows, and we're developing some great talent. So I'm really excited to where it's going. A lot of people kind of criticized. It's like, okay, you did it on HBO because HBO was a great platform to build boxers. So how are you going to replicate that on UFC Fight Pass, which isn't really known for a boxing platform. But I'd have to say, with the support that Dana's given and the social media reach that UFC has, I believe they have 40 million followers on their Instagram page. When UFC main Instagram posts about one of our shows, it has a huge reaction. You see what happened with Callum Walsh. You know, it's yeah, I would argue that UFC has just as big, or if not bigger, a reach than HBO did. I mean, HBO was tremendous with the 24/7 series, all those shoulder programming. But when you can get the UFC and Dana and the social media behind it, it really is a great platform to have boxing on.
I think it's great. Look forward to seeing a lot more of it in the future as far as Dana getting into that business. Tom, great to catch up. Thanks for coming in to join me. Look forward to being at some of those local shows. I think they're terrific. The crowds are awesome. If people haven't been to a club show, go. They're awesome. The atmosphere is great. The beer is cheap. It's a good time. But I appreciate you coming in.
And it's good fights. No, it's great to see you, Chris. Like I said, you go all the way back, you know, the Klitschko days, but the first interview with Triple G. And we're actually going to bring Callum back to MSG, back to your neck of the woods for St. Patrick's Day weekend. So
I love it.
Put that on the calendar.
Good stuff. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Chris.